I'm Patrick Gavin, Politico. I'm joined by America Ferrera. I have to tell you, we've had political dorks at this table all morning. It is so nice to have like a TV star here. It's just like a breath of fresh air.
Thank you. A TV star dork.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
We'll count that. So you have been in D.C. this week talking to folks on Capitol Hill about immigration. Tell us a little bit about who you've been meeting with and what you've talked about.
Well, I've met with reps on both sides of the aisle. I've met with Rep. Valadeo, with Nancy Pelosi, with Steny Hoyer, and it's a mixture of strategizing. How can I I do a lot of work with Voto Latino and with other organizations that are working relentlessly to keep the pressure on to take immigration reform to the vote. So strategizing about how do we keep the pressure on and how are we most effective, these organizations and also the members of these organizations and also, the 70 to 80% of Americans who are wanting to see immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship happen.
So where do you see the roadblock currently existing? What are you trying to get over when it comes to sitting down with these lawmakers? What's getting in the way of what you want to get done?
Well, it's about bringing it to vote. It's about Speaker Boehner, having the courage to do the right thing. And the truth is that there are reasonable, practical, pragmatic people on the Republican side who understand the need, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the wise thing to do economically, business-wise. Bringing money to our economy, and they understand the surge and what we have to gain from passing immigration reform. Those conversations aren't being had in the media because there's so much rancor and vitriol around this issue that there are Republicans who believe in the pragmatism of it, but won't step out and kind of have that common sense conversation because they're playing politics and they're wanting to get reelected and they're wanting to not get beat up by the press and by their fellow representatives.
Well, what's interesting about that angle about playing politics is that every single person, in fact, we just interviewed a guy early this morning who wrote this book. He's a Republican, and it's his playbook for winning the White House. And one of his chapters is called Kill Immigration Reform, You Kill the GOP, and that's his message to his own party. So what's interesting is that even though you say they're playing politics, I think most people would argue that if the Republican Party doesn't get on board of this, that they're playing politics to their detriment.
Right.
Is that right? Yeah.
It's very short-sighted, It's short-sighted to not stick your neck out on this issue because in the long term, this is the direction this country is going in. You hear the numbers all the time. Now it's over 800 million Latinos become 18 every year. That's a generation of young voters who are being forced to the polls by the GOP because they refuse to deal with an issue that, and again, like you said, the long term is, the Republican Party has an opportunity to take care of immigration so that they can appeal to these voters who may agree with them on other issues. But so long as immigration is not dealt with, they're really isolating themselves from a core demographic that's just going to keep growing.
Well, it's a weird thing too. The president obviously has to look over the country writ large. Senators have to look over their state, but congressmen only have to look over their district, which have been gerrymandered to a point where they don't necessarily have to listen to anybody else because they just want to get elected in their district, and a lot of the districts are fairly like-minded. So is that part of the problem that the House of Representatives is just on a different wavelength than either the White House or the Senate in terms of they know who their voters are, they know that if they just stick to the base, they're going to win re-election, so therefore they don't need to necessarily think about the party's success on a national level.
Right, well, yes, I think that is part of the problem, but again, it's back to this very narrow-minded way of thinking. It's, like we've been talking about, the long term is the GOP stands to get pummeled in the next election, and I think that in the long run, they should care about the well-being of their party and not just the immediate, how do I get reelected by my district?
You talked a lot about some of the rancor and vitriol that surrounds this debate. When you talk to, and I don't want to pigeonhole Republicans, when you talk to anybody who disagrees with you on the issue, are there some points that you think are perhaps more valid than others, even if you have a rebuttal to them? You say, well, I understand that completely, and that's not necessarily a sensational view. I might disagree. What do they say to you that they want you to understand?
Right. Well, listen, my personal belief is that passing immigration reform is the civil rights movement of our time, and you know, lifting a community of people in this country out of the shadows is the right thing to do. You can't appeal to everyone on that level. I think the facts that are not being well communicated are the ones about how our country stands to gain so much from passing comprehensive immigration reform in terms of economic, in terms of business booming, in terms of, you know, making it, you know, taking the spirit of the immigration community and letting that be channeled towards making this country great, which is what this country is supposed to be about. So I think that there are those more practical, pragmatic facts that are not being communicated, you know, over the kind of loud screaming and the very strong stances on both sides.
Well, quickly, let's shift to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the White House. I'm sure you saw the president got heckled recently talking about immigration, somebody asking that he stop deportations immediately. I'd love to get your take on that. And then also, and this might be a little bit too inside baseball for you, but we've been talking a lot recently about how the president's going into the end of the year with his lowest approval ratings ever, largely I think because of the rollout of healthcare. Is there any worry that that bully pulpit, his popularity dwindling, could hurt his ability to lead on this issue, which is going to be, I think, a signature issue of his in the new year? Is that at all worrisome?
Well, you know, I think that the president has come out in strong favor of immigration reform, and the truth is, you know, there are still roadblocks to it. So I think that the important thing is to focus on how do we have the votes to pass this. So how do we keep pressure, you know, on the powers that be that need to bring this to a vote? And it isn't just about the president as a silver bullet. You know, there are things the president can do with his executive power that could, you know, that a lot of people would want him to do in terms of dealing with deportations. But in terms of getting comprehensive immigration reform, making it the law of the land, we can't do that without keeping the pressure on the House of Representatives.
Are there things you'd like to see him do that he's not doing?
I think that there are things he could be doing that I think the Latino community is a little disappointed about.
Like what?
Like dealing with deportations immediately.
Right.
You know, I think 1,100 families a day is the number now are torn apart by deportations. These are not criminals. These are not 1,100 criminals a day being sent back to the U.S. These are people. These are children being left behind without parents who then go into the foster care system. So you want to talk about dealing with, you know, the burden of immigrants and immigration. Well, let's not make it harder for them to take care of their children and then, you know, flood the foster care system with children who aren't being cared for by their parents. And then to your other point about, you know, the president being heckled, this is the problem. You know, we can't come to a common good. You know, we can't say what's good for all of us because we can't get beyond our hate of the other side. And I'm certainly not here to say, you know, the Republicans are bad.
Heckling's not going to solve anything.
Heckling's not going to solve anything, but heckling happens on every, you know, on every level of it. You know, people sit and listen to the talking heads, and we can't get past the you know, the idea that these people's job is to sit down and compromise. That is their job is about what is good for the American people, not, you know, what's good for your election year.
You should be so glad you don't live in D.C. All we do is heckle people here.
I know,
It's like our national pastime. America Ferrera, thank you for joining us. Is this going to be, I imagine, a big cause of yours for the next year? We'll see you back here talking to folks in Capitol Hill.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not going anywhere. We're, you know, my involvement, Voto Latino, the tons of organizations that have rallied around this issue. You know, we're back in 2014, and we're keeping the pressure on, and, you know, till we get the vote.
America Ferrera,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us.
So
Appreciate
much.
it.